Well, good evening to everybody who's joined us, and thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for the organisation of this talk to Dr. Deborah Curitan, because we're really thrilled this evening to welcome Bridget Irving, who'll be talking about illustration and ecofeminism, rewilding Red Riding Hood's wolf. That's quite a tongue twister to say in and of itself. Bridget will be talking in a sec, but I'll just note that she's an illustrator and a picture book maker who works primarily in animal advocacy. She has an MA in visual communication, where she explored how visual ideas repeat and reinforce beliefs around the human-animal relationship, a relationship that is so often detrimental to the animal. Bridget uses her illustration to support animal rights, and she believes that illustrators have a responsibility to the non-humans whose likeness we use. So we'll have our talk in a second, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion or questions and answers afterwards, if that's okay, Bridget. So thank you ever so much for joining us, and if I may, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for that lovely introduction. And Deborah, I want to thank you especially for suggesting and organising this. I think it means a great deal to me. And thank you everyone else for being here and for being interested in my book and in what I might have to say. And thank you for being interested in illustration and illustration as a form of speech and as a form of activism. And if I can just check with Deborah that everything's okay. I think
yes, we can hear and see you.
Great. Thanks. And you can see my slides. Okay, so here's my title there: Illustration and Ecofeminism, Rewilding Red Riding Hood's Wolf. And that's me at the bottom there, my contact details. Now, normally for presentations about picture books, the author reader will read from the book, and that is what I'm going to do. But in order to do so, I've split this presentation into two parts. So the first will be something of the why I made my book, my motivations and inspirations. And then the second part, as we read the book and go through the illustrations together, there will be something of how I made this book. And here it is, my picture book, Little Red Hat. It's the story of a kid, a book, and a feeling that something isn't quite right with the way we look at the world. And yes, it does come with a knitting pattern for that little hat, and that's courtesy of my sister Sarah. Now, before I start, there are two important things I need you to know. And the first is that picture books are very, very important. And this is because they are a significant means by which we integrate young children into the ideology of our culture. And of course, children, the intended audience, are inexperienced, they're naive. But books can never be said to be trivial or without meaning. And perhaps this is even more true of the so-called hypertext, such as Red Riding Hood, where she constitutes a universal icon, and the revisioning of her story is an international phenomenon. And now the second thing that I want you to know is that making picture books is really, really hard. In preparing for this presentation, I came across this drawing in my sketchbook that I was using working through to make the book, and I'd forgotten it, both the doodle and the moment, which is probably just as well. But now it seems really important to include it and to share it. Okay, so let's move on and start part one. Why did I make this book? Well, pretty much all the time, all I think about is these two. And I think about what it is that they stand for, and that is the human-animal relationship and how we describe it. And I think about how we talk of it and how we represent it. And I think about what that means for animals. And here they are again. Now, Professor Jack Sipes, he's an activist and a scholar of children's literature. He describes this scene where they meet where Red and the wolf meet, as a significant moment. He says it is the key scene in terms of both of their destinies. Now, I want to say at this point that I absolutely love picture books, not just Red Riding Hood. I collect them, and I scour the shops and the internet to seek out secondhand ones, and I borrow them from the library. But I'm not a child, and I'm not naive. I see the distortions, and I see the negative stereotyping, and I see how we challenge, rightly so, the representation of people in illustration. And I see how we disregard the representation of animals and the non-humans who constitute such a large part of children's stories. And I see the way we attribute human characteristics for them. For example, here, the wolf is illustrated wearing a sheepskin coat, and it's made abhorrent on the wolf. And I see how the wolf is framed as evil through the repetition of damaging human-centered views. And I see how he is forever made big and bad. Now, these are teaching aids for 5 to 7-year-olds. You can find them all over the internet. And I see how through line and shape, form and composition, the wolf is made greedy, endlessly and detrimentally anthropomorphized. Now, I'm not wholly against anthropomorphized imagery of animals. That's probably a whole another presentation, but needless to say, to use it is our privilege. And I see how exaggerated features describe a single-sided portrait of a creature with just one thing on his mind. And I see where his identity has been stripped from him, and I see how he has become just a shadow and a metaphor that looms so large that his likeness has become established as symbolic for seducer, abuser, sexual predator. I see how we use his image to tell our stories, not his. And in our stories, I see how feminist criticism explains that Red was and is made passive, and that female characters were and are portrayed as the victims. Now, I'm not here to break down those ideas, but to say that in examination of power plays, there is and there always has been another participant. And so I see where Red is described with context. She's given a family and a home, but typically the wolf has none of this. He's often shown to be alone. And when he's killed, we don't see who grieves for him. Now, I didn't set out to make a story from an ecofeminist perspective. I set out to tell just the wolf's story, to turn it around for him somehow. But I soon learned that this story, spoken through just one perspective, doesn't tell the whole story. And I see how binary thinking is a typical feature in fairy tales. Many fall into these narratives that we know of good and bad. And I see how this confirms absolute ideas of human and animal, them and us, moral, immoral, and innocent and wicked, and all of that. And this is problematic for a feminist Red Riding Hood, because she's then forced to change sides and to take a dominant position. And I wonder if these feminist interpretations continue to reinforce ideas of difference, distrust, and danger. And I see where these new Reds, they begin to be described as feisty and independent, and she no longer is easily fooled, and she's going to take matters into her own hands. And I see that these differently constructed Reds, the Red Riding Hoods who save themselves, have been armed with scissors, axes and poisons, and they've become violent and vengeful, seeking redress for the sins of the wolf's past incarnations. And through the persistence of negative stereotyping, the wolf is made stupid, he's made dangerous and killable. and he's ridiculed. And I came to see how singular and particular approaches are still problematic for the wolf. Now, I want you to look at this image. It's from a contemporary award-winning picture book, and it was reviewed as a bold feminist version. And confirmed through the combination of image and text that we can see that this Red Riding Hood is triumphant. She's literally cut out the middleman and murdered the wolf herself. She's been given a dominant energy, a dominating identity. She's been given power, but the story hasn't changed. And through animal advocate eyes, I see trophy hunting. And I wonder why in the creation of the book, how no one saw the wolf or an alternative. And it seems to me that both the wolf and Red are victims of hierarchy and power dynamics of dominant belief systems. And I wonder why, when anything can happen in a children's picture book, are we still pitching them against each other? I just wanted to incorporate this illustration. I think they're calling each other scum. I think it's a work of genius, and for me, it sums it all up. It's from 1993. And so, to find a new story and to find new ways to represent the wolves, I began to learn about them and how to speak for them. So it wasn't all picture book research. These were two of the many books that I studied and referenced. I would recommend both, and I particularly recommend anything by Mark Beekoff. And Animals Erased by Aaron Stibbe was a key text in the making of Little Red Hat. It was through Animals Erased that I began to build a sort of visual eco-linguistic dictionary, and I discovered techniques to prevent erasure of the wolf and to be sure to give him significance. And through Animals Erased, I was introduced to ideas of using non-Western storytelling techniques which allow for narratives without the familiar protagonist versus antagonist standards. And it was through Animals Erased that I was reunited with my neighbour Totoro. If you haven't seen this film, I highly recommend this too. And in Totoro and this genre of Japanese animated films, we get to see how images of nature are incorporated for their own sake. Backgrounds are precious. Nature is welcomed, illuminated, and embraced into stories where it serves no part in the drama. It's there because it belongs there. And when I was researching, I'd watch the live webcams from all over the world in wolf sanctuaries, and I'd have them on all day and catch glimpses of the wolves. And wolves are incredibly shy, typically afraid of people. These three rescues are the ambassador wolves from the Wolf Conservation Centre in New York State. And hopefully, if it works, I'm just going to play a short video from their website. Oh, get that to play. Okay, here we go. I also saw and looked at, I haven't included any in this presentation, but I saw the Instagram profiles and images of wolf hunting. Hunting is violence. And I sketched and I experimented a lot. And I've learned that drawing is a way to care, and it can be a tool with which to look, to really look. And I looked at ecofeminism to find a way to tell the story differently for all the players. And I looked to writing by Carol Adams, and she speaks of inclusion and equality. And I paraphrase her here when she says that care is a part of how we relate to the other, and that other is potentially any part of this planet. And that ecofeminism allows for the articulation of an ethic of care. But what would an ecofeminist representation of Red Riding Hood look like? Well, I found some I call them allies, where the human-wolf relationship is represented differently. And this wondrous example from 1974, The Last Wolf, is where the wolf is given an identity and meaning. He's given salience. He describes and he's described with other wolves. We see them. He has a family. He's actually talking about his ancestors here. And the wolf and Red are best friends. But tragically, he's still killed by a hunter. And the book ends with Red sobbing in her grandmother's arms. There is care, but still no happy ending for anyone. I've not been able to find a copy of this book, although I'd love to. I keep looking, but I encountered it in Sandra Beckett's anthology, Red Riding Hood for All Ages. And I found single illustrations amongst other versions, such as this scene from Helen Oxenbury's 2019 interpretation. And here the wolf is given a momentary reprieve from negative connotations. And I want to read the words because they matter here with the image. By the wooden swing gate at the end of the wood, hard upon the open meadow, sat a great grey wolf. He rested his chin upon the bars of the gate, and he listened to the woodcutters. He was afraid of them. He durst not go home to his bed in the thicket. That was written by Beatrix Potter. Now, this is a real moment of tenderness, and we see his cane is set to the side, and there's distance between him and the people. His face is filled with sadness. He feels. This is a moment to feel empathy with the wolf, but I still don't know if he's noticed. And then came Wolf in the Snow by Matt Cordell, and it won the 2018 Caldecott Medal for Children's Book Artists. I recommend this book wholeheartedly. It's beautiful. And through a lost and found narrative, Matt Cordell brings just enough from the traditional Red Riding Hood story that we recognise it, but he takes his character on a different path. His Red is caring, and yet she defies negative female stereotyping. She's brave, and she has what might have once been called that, boy's own adventure. The wolves are real, they feel, they experience, and this eye contact suggests connection and kinship. And this is that meeting, the key scene where their destinies are decided. Cordell's Red faces a dilemma. There's a slight spoiler alert. She finds a lost wolf cub. She's holding him there. But Cordell steers her away from any historical conflicts with the wolf. Now, Wolf in the Snow is a wordless book, but Cordell calls her she when he's interviewed about his book and says she's inspired by his own daughter. And if we read Wolf in the Snow through an ecofeminist lens, we can see that Red is seen to act out of empathy. And empathy is a particular kind of attention. It's a kind of moral perception. And my book, Little Red Hat, is also a mostly wordless book. And so as we go into the second part of my presentation and explore the book, there may be moments of quiet where the illustration's on the screen, but I'm not speaking, but I am still here. I based my story structure on a traditional East Asian 4-act narrative called Kisho Tenketsu. It's based on poetry structures. It appears in the Studio Ghibli films and in Super Mario games. And I also think it's in the film Parasite, if anyone's seen that, an entirely different genre, but it shows the flexibility of the narrative. Now, I'm going to provide just a very brief outline of Kisho Tenketsu, but it's worth exploring further. So the 4 parts, Ki, Sho, Ten and Ketsu, as the name suggests. There's an introduction, we get character development, then 10 is where the shift happens in the story, and there's often a shift in location that appears suddenly and without explanation. It's sometimes called a twist, but I thought that complicates things for us, so think of it as a shift. And then the 4th act, Ketsu, is the conclusion and is where sense is made of that earlier shift. And it was Kisho Tenketsu that gave me the framework on which to build my story and to go from things like this and this to this. And now, I can't help myself say this, if you're all sitting comfortably, I shall begin. Act 1, key. And so over a couple of pages, I introduce my main characters. And I show where they live. And I saw early on that my red character was developing, wearing a kind of onesie, part pyjama and part play costume. And through the hat, which became the title, I was able to suggest an unspoken connection between the child and the wolves outside. And throughout the book, I've illustrated the ear positions on the hat to help convey emotions in the same way that wolves do. And then as I developed the character, I purposefully didn't impress gender. At one point, I did want to illustrate a female character who didn't kill. But ultimately, for Little Red Hat, I wanted a story that presents a child as an eco-citizen, an inclusive story, and a character who all children can see themselves in. And then Act 2 show where the characters develop, and it deepens connections between reader and characters. I thought about recasting the adult figure as a male figure, not as hunter, but as nurturer, and I could tackle another stereotype. But in the end, I decided to create a female adult character and to use the visual codes that conventionally describe female. I wanted to reclaim the female roles within the traditional story and counter accusations that Red was naive, naive for believing the wolf's disguise. See, I think that Red wasn't and isn't naive because she's a girl. She's naive because she's a child. And I also wanted a female adult character for my mum. And for me, as the storyteller and as a champion for animals and as the guardian of my characters. And then Act 3, 10. So this is where the shift happens. There's this unexpected change and a change in location. And I took this opportunity to include other animals and other beings. They're also shy and are hiding amongst the trees. And staying in the forest, I purposefully illustrated the wolves living wolf lives, living wild wolf lives. You can see here that the connection with the webcam pictures. And there's no humans in these illustrations, just wolves illustrated without derogatory distortion or exaggeration. Illustration too can be a way to pay attention. And now the dangers for the wolves. And this was a scene that I had in mind from the very start. I had this idea a very long time ago, I'd say years ago, to find a way to reveal the truth beneath the myth, to shout that we are the threat to wolves and not the other way round. Now, I drew these machines watching videos of forest destruction, which I don't recommend anyone does. And I was quite shocked because the machines, this is what they look like. I rarely plan an illustration. They grow as I put pencil to paper and they develop from really just starting to draw, but they come from inside, as if I am the tree, as if I am the wolf and the child and the adult. But I'm also the narrator, a spectator in some way, watching the fires burn and feeling helpless at the enormity of it all. And then the final part, Act 4, Ketsu, where we recall the start of the story and brings the elements of the narrative together. It's actually sometimes referred to as the reconciliation stage. Now, before the pandemic, before lockdown, I visited a wolf sanctuary, and I asked there about their thoughts on rewilding wolves in Britain and elsewhere. And I was surprised when they said they were against it. They say that the causes of wolf extinction still exist, that hunting and habitat destruction continue, and mistrust and misunderstanding persist. They say we're not ready, and first our relationship with nature needs to be healed. I'm not sure when I actually realised that my book tells a story of its own making as well, how it came into being. It mirrors my awareness, enlightenment, if you like, where my illustration practice and animal advocacy came together, and I began to see why I think about the world the way I do. And I know I chose crayon and pencils to encourage story making and even drawing within the book on the pages to give a unique relationship between the child and the book, between readers and characters. And now I want to join the voices working to help heal that rift between people and nature and between humans and animals. And I want to show how all of us can be part of that too, to help change the destinies for both of them. And that's it. Thank you very much. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much. If I may, then I'll extend an invitation to colleagues who are here, if they have any observations or any questions for Bridget, then now would be the time, and feel free, of course, to type in the chat box. Alternatively, if you'd like to take the floor, you'll be really welcome as well to do that and ask the question live. I've just got some comments coming in. Aaron said that was superb. Thank you. Carmen, thank you. That was beautiful and enlightening. Jen, well done, Bridget. Incredibly thoughtful and beautifully illustrated. Isabella says, great talk, Bridget. Thank you. Ellie, what a beautiful presentation. Thank you. And Deborah says, thank you. Such a great presentation. Can I ask, where can we get hold of your book?
Great question. So it's on. So I've had it printed. I haven't gone down the conventional digital. It's self-published basically. I am reaching out to publishers and agents, but I've self-published it, and I've had it printed on paper that would suit being drawn on, and I've had it printed by a local firm. It's all on high quality paper. Yeah, so on my website. Or somebody, you can message me, but yeah, there's you can order it from my website, which is just my name. Yeah, or just message me.
Thank you.
Deborah, or if any doubt, just contact Deborah and she can.
Yeah. So Deborah, do you have your hand up?
I do, because I wanted to ask a question. You showed us that image of a feminist version of Red Riding Hood, where she was wearing a fox coat.
Yes, she's wearing the wolf. She's wearing the wolf skin coat. Yeah, so she's killed the wolf.
I wondered if you could have a conversation with that author. What sort of advice would you give her in terms of the ecofeminist lens?
That's a great question, because it's really important that that you understand. I don't say any of this with blame for those examples that I've used. That was her final degree show book, and so she would have had tutors and mentors and publishers, and it's almost like, I just want to say, even with people with great intentions and good intentions and kind intentions, we still end up with the wolf suffering. So if I was ever fortunate enough to have a conversation with her, I would just suggest she just made a sequel. And that she could turn that around, and we could have the wolf there sitting with Red, and they've, I don't know, her coat could be made of cotton or acrylic or something. There's I mean, she wouldn't need my advice in storytelling, I'm sure. She's a very talented illustrator. So yeah, that's what I would suggest, a sequel where there's another surprise perhaps, and the wolf isn't dead after all. They could set up a wolf sanctuary together.
Thank you. I think we've got a question from Rosemary. Rosemary, would you like to speak? I'm not sure if we have you, Rosemary.
She says she can't speak there.
Do I need to unmute you? Maybe that's...
Oh, she says she can't speak because of low internet.
Oh, sorry, right, okay. Sorry, I didn't see that. Rosemary, would you like to type your question? Would that be possible? Just while that's going on, I can see we've got a couple of things as well. Deborah Litley says, as an ex-primary school teacher, I can really see the value of this text. There are so many messages that this portrays that are very important, as the world will only change through education. And Annika says, very well thought out, important subject and beautifully illustrated.
Thank you.
Rosemary says, what is this actually is a question I wanted to ask. What is the working definition of ecofeminism as we live in a gender fluid age? Thanks for the question, Rosemary.
Yes, so that's a really good question, because it was a big concept and a confusing concept for me to take on when I came across it. And it does get accusations of things like essentialism and sort of defining and roles and being excluding others. But Carol Adams and others like her, they say that it's by its nature extends to things like being anti-colonialism and anti-racism, and because it's an ethic of care, it expands beyond being just the environment and women's rights. That it's grown over the decades to expand to embrace all fights against oppressive dominant belief systems. So for me, that was a way that I was able to take that on, that it's not that it's a sort of political and social cultural positioning where it's actually combating division. So these are the people that I would look to, like people like Carol Adams, for those sort of better explanations that I'm fumbling through. But I hope, does that make sense? They consider it very, very inclusive. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, so we invite further questions, and Professor Ross Pryor. Ross, would you like to speak, or are you happy to type?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to speak. That's probably faster. Yeah, look, Bridget, thank you very much. I enjoyed that immensely. There was a book a number of years ago called The True Story of the Three Little Pigs. Do you know that? It was the reversal of the story, and it's told from the wolf's perspective. It was simply a flipping of the story, and it's been used in drama education now around the world as a way of developing empathy. So I was interested in your comment that empathy is essentially a moral perspective, I think you said.
Yes.
And that's what drama education's about, developing that empathy. But by just flipping a story, you're able to develop empathy in ways that, you know, we often just hear stories, but we don't go, you know, very deeply into them or think of the converse, really.
That's true. Just one thing I'd like to say. Oh, thank you for that. Just one thing I want to say about flipping stories round. That was sort of where I started off, and there are lots of examples of things like, you know, there's the vegetarian wolf, there's the kind wolf, and little wolf cub stories, and of course they're all important. This is the other thing, all of these books are important, and it's together that the messages can change. But one thing I read about flipping a story is that it can in itself reinforce the original story, where the story is such a dominant way of thinking, that will still persist as the sort of cultural dominant story and I would suggest in things like Red Riding Hood and things like even maybe Three Little Pigs, where the original is so well known that flipping it doesn't always change it enough, if that makes sense.
colleagues, yes, we invite further comments or observations. Deborah Litley says there's twisted stories and fractured tales, a bit Disneyfied.
Yeah, Disneyfied. Disneyfication is a great term that I've come across, where you make a character so human that you just lose sight. And Disney do this. I have to say, I grew up on things like Bambi and good old Disney days. But yeah, I understand this Disneyfication concept where they become so cute or so human-like that you just lose sight of the original animal.
Anthropomorphisation, is that the right word?
It is, and actually I think because people are often really dismissive of anthropomorphizing animals in picture books. I actually quite like it in some ways because it's converting what they experience into our language. So if we see them dressed and we see them sort of living something akin to people lives, we might be able to make sense of that. And of course, hopefully somebody doesn't just have one book, if you have picture books with anthropomorphized animals in, be sure to have photographic picture books and other differently illustrated books. I think we just got to be careful if we use anthropomorphizing of animals. We just need to be careful and be aware of what we're doing with it.
Can I ask then? That prompts me to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, there's obviously a Disney tendency that was often this complete anthropomorphization through voiceovers on, wildlife footage and stuff like this, and that I think a number of people have argued reinforces dominant notions of the heterosexual nuclear family, the parents, the kids, all this kind of thing. But I mean, a step beyond that, which is into the popularity now of wildlife documentaries and figures like David Attenborough. Do you have a particular take on this genre?
Of the voiced over, where you're seeing documentary video.
Well, I mean more the representation of animals in now wildlife documentaries, the David Attenborough school of
yeah. So obviously, I just think he's a superstar amongst animal things, and I definitely grew up on his and felt that that connection and understanding of animal worlds. But the criticism of this is they present everything as okay, and I think this has been a recent criticism of him. We see this, apparently they clean the beaches of all the plastic, and so we don't, so on one hand, they can help us make connections and create empathy with animals, but on the other side, they are presenting this idea that it's all right out there. And believe me, it really, really isn't all right out there. So it's probably that they're great. It's just that we don't see a balance. That's the thing. It's when the same thing is repeated over and over again that we get the problems.
Thank you. Okay, Jen, are you able to join us to ask your question?
Yeah, hi. I'm Jen. I'm Bridget's niece, actually. Hi. I just wanted to ask Bridget. I just speaking as well about the idea of power dynamics in showing the story, and I really liked the way you used the book and also the window to kind of show that how we represent stories and how we represent the wolf. And I thought that was a really simple but incredibly sophisticated way to, kind of like what you were saying about David Attenborough and how they clean the beaches, to kind of show that we see through a specific lens, and Little Red views the world through books and through stories, and she doesn't ever, I think, come into contact with the wolf directly. But I wanted to ask, you said that you looked at non-Western storytelling and looked at the Japanese story structure, and I wanted to ask as well whether you looked at any kind of looked at English myths or British myths at all. I've been reading a lot recently about the land reclaiming movement in the UK and like common lands, and these are things that are just on my mind. But yeah, I was just wondering as well if you had any thoughts particularly about British or English myth and how that maybe came to influence the final project.
That's a really interesting. I didn't actually look at any. Well, a lot of the books that the versions of Red Riding Hood that I looked up are Western narratives, and based on the original stories by Charles Perrault and then the Grimm Brothers version. So a lot of them are just repeating those originals. I didn't look at too many other British ones. Something for next time. But you remind me of something, Jen, which was really important when I was doing this, and is that we think of deforestation as happening in the Amazon. And when we see out of our windows the countryside in Europe, in Britain, and we see that as countryside, but that is deforestation. And we've removed the trees and the meadows, and the wolves are extinct now in Britain and in Europe. Well, in parts of Europe they're extinct because we've turned it all, the countryside, into essentially a lot for animal agriculture, and we've turned it all into fields. So it reminded me that of the sort of Western viewpoint that I wanted to bring that back to it being a wolf problem in the West, deforestation, and not just a problem of places like Indonesia and South America. So I don't know if that helps, Jen. I've gone off the subject there, but that was reminded me of that point I wanted to make.
No, thank you, Bridget. I think we're actually we're the least biologically diverse place in Europe, I believe.
Right.
Yeah, that's another
catastrophic. Well, if you read the word biodiversity, we need to put the word catastrophic in front of it. We just got to stop pretending that everything's okay. Yeah. Thanks, Jen.
No worries.
I forget who said it, but this idea that deforestation is colonialism in
yeah, there is that as well. This whole idea of it's just this concept of resources, and if you've got the power, you will take it, whether in whatever form that is and wherever that's from. That's power. That's the abuse of power.
Aaron says, I use Little Red Hat in my course, the search for new stories to live by. My students love analysing it. It really helps them shift their perspective on stories and nature.
That's lovely.
So are there any final comments or observations or questions?
From me or from anyone?
From yourself and from those who are here.
I just want to add that drawing is a really important way to help people connect with nature. To go out there, don't go to sea life, don't go to these places, go outside, draw leaves, don't worry if it looks like it, draw what it feels like, draw what it smells like, and just, draw a lot. And it really is a way to look and to pay attention and a way to care. I do see them all wrapped up together. I see illustration as, it's been considered the little sister to fine art. And, think about when women were denied access or had restricted access to careers in fine art, illustration was considered fair game for them, for the fairer sex. So I do see, this illustration and concepts of ecofeminism. I see them as sort of tools for fighting together. Yeah.
And an illustration as a liberating mechanism for
absolutely, yeah. If we take time with it and use it wisely, yeah.
I think Ruskin said that one should just sketch, and to train the eye, it doesn't matter if you have
right, and the process. So that's how I draw. I just draw, and then something comes, but it comes from all the things that you did the day before, the things you read about, the film you saw on TV, the David Attenborough program, or the book you read, the conversations you had, and then the next day you draw, and you just draw. It doesn't matter. Really don't worry about the outcome. And pencils, they're great. You don't need anything. You don't need electricity. You don't need paints and water, just pencils. Yeah.
Ross, you've got your hand up.
Yes, Bridget, just on that point, I edit the Journal of Applied Arts and Health, And I'd like to extend an invitation to you to perhaps contribute more of a visual essay on that very topic of drawing, being in nature, and for wellness, because it's a very topical issue at the moment. And
it is, yes.
And so I'd be delighted if you would consider contributing something to the journal.
I'll accept that invitation. And I guess Deborah can put us in touch with each other.
Yes.
If that's okay, yeah.
Would be brilliant.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you ever so much, Bridget, for your fantastic, insightful talk and for introducing us to this world of your work and indeed the wider concepts that inform your practice. And I think really making them, as many of the comments said, concrete to us as a fascinating approach to the wider world at a time of such crisis. So I do thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you to our guests for being here today. Thank you as well to Deborah for arranging this, and I do urge everybody, as per the instruction, to get a hold of a copy of Little Red Hat. What a wonderful gift it would be as well to family members. So I do recommend that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, yes, indeed. So Deborah, we're okay to draw this to a close?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Bridget. It's been a really insightful and quite moving presentation, so thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. So with that, I'll wish you good health and good evening, and we'll formally end the meeting.